Hello and welcome back to Felony Miami. I'm your host, Joe Stone, and on today's program, we have two guests, two professionals, to find out whether or not you're lying or you're telling the truth. Directly across from me is Naib Hassan. He is a criminal defense attorney with his own private practice, previously worked at the law firm of Robert Dolman, and it was a prosecutor in the Broward State Attorney's Office. Hassan says it was like a jungle, but a jungle that he entered and came out stronger working in that office. It only makes you stronger, and it's the best 3 years of his professional life. Currently, at the law offices, Naib Hassan. He deals with state and federal cases. He is a graduate of the University of Florida, Frederick Levin College of Law. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And to my left, Joseph W. Harper. He's a retired Miami-Dade County police detective, graduated Florida International University in Miami, and holds a BS degree in criminal justice. Mr. Harper is an expert witness in polygraph science in both federal and state courts, with specific polygraphs conducted around the world. Mr. Harper is utilized by law enforcement and defense attorneys in the determination of truth or deception. Professional associations include the Florida Polygraph Association, the American Polygraph Association, and the American Association of Polygraphists?
Polygraphists.
Polygraphists. If you need to marry more than one
Can't
woman.
spell that, though. I don't.
Joe has also appeared on numerous television shows and is famous for his 7-year segment on Sábado Gigante, where he administered polygraph tests to couples involved in spousal disputes. You've been doing this for about 40 years now?
Yes, sir. 40 years.
Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks.
So this is a very interesting thing. Let me just jump off with this. Polygraphs, can they be actually used in court?
For the most part, no, they can't be used in court settings. There are times that they are used, and for the most part, they're used during the interview process of certain witnesses, and or in limited circumstances, they could be used for cross-examination during a federal case where a person comes up lying or something like that.
So do they hold water?
Do they hold water in a courtroom setting to present them? No, but do these guys, the detectives and the police departments use them? Absolutely. They scare the shit out of people.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I once...
Literally.
Yeah, literally. I once had a job at a lumber place when I was like 16, and they sent me to do a polygraph as part of being hired. And I had been working there for 2 weeks, and when I got back 2 days after the polygraph, they canned me. I was like, oh, what was up with
Says
that?
a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have done that much damage. I was only 16, for God's sakes. I don't want to do a polygraph now. Okay, so tell me a little bit about how this stuff works and why, if it's not admissible in court, really, why is it so widely used? Why do so many people use this?
Well, from a defense attorney's standpoint, they really want to know the status of their client. They want to know if that client is being truthful with them or not, especially before charges are filed. In that early stages, if they can present the polygraph that says that the person's telling the truth, it wasn't him, or the fact he wasn't the gunman, he was only the getaway driver, that kind of thing. That information is very important for prosecutors and defense attorneys.
So prosecutors use the polygraph too?
Oh, they do. Before trial, before charges are leveled.
Yeah.
I've had the circumstance where pretty much charges have been leveled against the client, and then there's disputable discussions in the middle of it where witnesses are going back and forth regarding certain testimonies. You always want to do as a defense attorney, you do an independent polygraph exam. So pretty much you get a preliminary review, and then once you obtain the results, then you pretty much submit them to the state's polygraph examiners for them to conduct their polygraph. But you pretty much always want to know what your client's, where your client's stance is as far as the objectives on the polygraph examination.
Right. So, Joe, let me ask you this. It's a lie detector test. How does it work?
Well, actually, it's an emotional stress monitor. It's not really a lie detector test. It works on the fight-flight holding mechanism that's been with us for 500,000 years as we've been on this earth as Homo sapiens.
Like primitive brain function
We've
stuff.
learned how to defend ourselves over those years with defense mechanisms. First, the heart races when you're being confronted. It could be a lion at the cave door, or it could be a question about shooting someone Thursday night. The brain is sending information to the body that we're in trouble. Start to defend ourselves. The heart races, not the blood pressure. It's the heart racing to pump the blood to the core. From the extremities, from the face. That's why people sometimes turn pale and faint in threatening situations. So the blood pressure, the blood rate and strength increases in a polygraph. That's the first indicator on the chart. The second indicator is the galvanic skin response or electrodermal response. What happens when you perceive a problem, the brain perceives a problem. The skin is your armor. Your skin contracts to protect you as well. The heart's racing, the skin is contracting, and moisture is emitted from your fingertips. That moisture is recordable. That moisture, they theorize back 500,000 years ago, helped people escape threatening situations. Your hands are wet, you can grab things better. Tree limbs, rocks, bushes, name it, you can get out of town. And it's just a defense mechanism that's recordable on a polygraph. The third area of concern is the respiration. What happens in the respiration is all the muscles around the heart and lungs contract, again, to protect you. So you have these three functions taking place all at once. It's recordable and identifiable in a polygraph test on a chart. When those defense mechanisms take place, they're easily identifiable in a polygraph.
Easily.
Yeah, very much so. The breathing is suppressed. You think you're inhaling the same volume of air, but you can't because your lungs are contracted by the muscles.
So that's that little bungee cord that goes around your chest.
Yeah, right, so to speak.
That's what it looks like. It looks like an old telephone cord. I would say old telephone cord, but half of our listeners would be like, what's an old telephone cord?
Yeah, really. Well, they're attachments, let's call them. You put them around the upper and lower abdominal and thoracic regions.
Okay.
Basically because men are stomach breathers and women are chest breathers. So you cover both areas. And you get a double line as to what's happening with the respiration.
Okay.
So
if you're asking me a question and I'm not being truthful,
right,
your equipment's gonna start doing little squigglies.
You see like I said, the rate and strength of the heartbeat increases and rises. The galvanic skin response or the electrodermal response rises as well, and the breathing suppresses.
Okay.
So you have all those three areas to look at. And it's not only done one time. It's done several times through one chart, and we go to 2, 3, 4 more charts. More data, the better.
Right. So, like a well-done polygraph, it's not something that's done in 10 minutes.
Oh, no.
No? How long is a proper polygraph going to take?
At least 2 to 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
It depends on how much information you have to cover as well. And plus, when people come in, they're nervous.
Right.
Which I'll tell you has nothing to do with the polygraph. Nerves has absolutely nothing to do with it. But if they're not nervous, I get nervous because it's just a natural state, the fear of the unknown, so to speak.
Sure.
But what we look for in the polygraph, again, are those physiological changes that are taking place due to your DNA.
Okay, so is there a way to cheat? Because you've heard different stories, like if you clench your butt cheeks together, does that work?
Anything that's abnormal in a polygraph test, like functions like that,
you
just discard it. The person's using countermeasures, and you move on. That's all.
So is there a way to cheat the polygraph?
Yeah, don't take it. That's really the best advice I could give you.
I mean, I've heard things like if you take some like beta blockers before you go in.
No, that's not. You can do nothing to deter those physiological reactions your body has known, or we have known as human beings for 500,000 years. You can't stop the rate and strength of the heartbeat.
You can't control it.
You can't control it. No, you can't control your electrodermal response either. That's nature's way of protecting you. And these areas are identifiable. And if there's anything that differs from that, if there's somebody's playing with the polygraph, it's so simple. I mean, I start laughing. Police applicants are the worst because they know everything.
Really?
Oh, the worst.
Give me an example.
Because they read a book. They hold their breath for 20 seconds, 30 seconds.
But during the
Well,
polygraph?
I'm getting ready to pick them up sometimes, from fainting. But
Really?
oh yeah, they just try ridiculous things, and you try to talk to them and say, "Look, I'm going to discard that chart. You want to work with me or not?"
Oh, really? You have
yeah.
to.
Oh, yeah,
You have to start over sometimes.
Oh, many times.
Really?
Yeah.
So is it you go through this thing and then you know how to read the data and then you go and create a report?
Yeah. Well, the polygraph program scores it as well.
It does.
And then I come along and I use my techniques to score the test as well. And then you write a report as to what was said, the results of the examination, and then that concludes it.
So who are the biggest liars usually?
Husbands. I'm just kidding. Just kidding out there.
Damn.
Criminals are the biggest liars, really.
Are they?
Oh, yeah.
The guilty ones?
Yeah. Well, they just have such egos. The problem with criminals is they have high ego and low intelligence most of the time. So that combination is reckless. So they have this idea that they could blow smoke at me
Right.
and get past it, but good luck with that because I've done so many.
You got the equipment hooked
I've done
up.
30,000 of these things, so I know if what's there is proper or it's being manipulated. I can tell that.
You can tell the difference.
Oh, easily.
Yeah. What's the biggest lie Naib, you've ever caught somebody in doing one of these?
Doing one of these?
Yeah.
Oh, let's say it just didn't go forward. Talk to a client regarding a crime in another jurisdiction.
Yeah.
We discussed it at length. He kept on supporting his argument for about 2 years that he hadn't gone forward, he hadn't committed the crime, but he couldn't basically go forward with the polygraph. Put pressure on the family, put pressure on everybody. I'm like, look, this is the one last avenue that we have. I finally convinced the prosecutor, let me have the ability. Let me do the polygraph test.
Uh-huh.
And his words to me were, you know what? If you want to do the polygraph test, you believe your client's going to pass it. Well, let's do something. We'll take a polygraph test, and it's admissible in court. We'll both stipulate to the documents that it'll be admissible in court.
Oh, so you can agree that it will be admissible and presented in court.
Absolutely. You can contract through anything. So pretty much we were going to agree to do this. So I go forward to my client. I'm like, look, this is a situation. I went to him on a Sunday night, 8 o'clock at night. Pretty much Monday was his courtroom setting. So I wanted to present the discussion to the prosecutor the next day. I go and have a discussion. It was at that point that pretty much everything had ended. It wasn't.
Told you the
God,
truth.
got the whole truth at that point.
Really?
Yeah.
That's the essence of a polygraph, really. Freud said criminals always leave clues. They have a compulsion to confess. And I really went on that premise for all these years. And in my opinion, he's pretty much right.
Yeah.
They become the center of attention then once they're arrested. Now they're confessing. Now the whole family surrounds them. They're the center of attention. That kind of thing is... People don't realize that, but that does happen.
Yeah. Well, you were a police officer on the streets for a lot of
detective,
years.
Yeah.
And, I mean, as a detective, you've probably seen some pretty, in Miami, some pretty awful stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
Is
Every
there-
night there's something new.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Anything that stands out to you? I mean, specifically?
Drunk driver took out an entire family one time in a minivan and having to pick up children's body parts, and that never leaves you. I don't care how long you live, that'll never leave you. And just day after day, things like that. I also got shot one night, so that was pretty terrible, too.
Where?
I got shot in the neck in a firefight in Liberty City.
Oh, wow.
So that's what precipitated my interest in polygraph, because when I came back to work, the department sent me for polygraph training.
They did.
Yeah.
Were you injured where you couldn't be out in the
I
streets
was
anymore?
shot in the neck, so my left arm and left side of my body was paralyzed totally.
Really?
Spent several years in rehab and finally came back 35% or so, but enough to function.
Yeah.
So it's terrible out there. My squad had 8 guys. 4 of us got blown away. So, I mean, it's pretty dangerous.
What year was that?
Back in the 70s.
Jeez. Yeah, it was a crazy town back then, huh?
It really was, yeah.
A lot of people.
A lot of anger. Still anger today. I don't know what it is, but everybody seems so angry.
Do you think it's anger, or
I
do you
think it's flat out anger. It just appears that way.
Yeah,
I was
from
mad at something. You're getting more than I'm getting. No, it's
lack of
not-
opportunity, maybe.
Frustration and leads to anger. and which leads to playing out that anger.
Violence.
Yeah, violence, sure.
But it seem that there was, I mean, you're telling me that in the 70s, 4 of your 8-man crew got blown away.
Right.
And it seems
different
like
times.
Yeah, but it seems like, I mean, it seems like we're hearing more violence from the police against people and more violence against people against the police, I should say. Nowadays, is that maybe not true? It's just that it's more widely reported or more widely discussed?
I think that has a lot to do with it, but also my recommendation to anyone would be, if you're informed you're under arrest, do not, under any circumstances, resist from that point forward, and everything will be fine. But if you want to fight the police, you're not going to win. You're just not going to win.
It's too many.
And and it's just, the charges add up. I used to tell people this. I said, we're arresting you for a stolen car now. And the person would start acting out. I said, I could start adding resisting arrest, fighting the police, battery on police. And you'll never get out of jail because you'll never be able to pay that bond.
Right.
And it kind of settled them down a little bit. When you told them the facts of life, the charges will just keep going. It's auto theft now. You'll be out by the morning.
Right.
Instead of all this.
Sure.
So that kind of worked a lot of times. But today.
Yeah, because you seem like a pretty level-headed guy.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I would talk to people. The best thing you have as a police officer is your temperament and your ability to talk to people. Mm-hmm. And we stand between the victims and the subjects. That's where our position is. Mm-hmm. So if you could talk a subject out of holding a hostage or something like that, that's what you do. You don't want to charge the house. And if you could use your brains and your wit to get them to give up,
yeah,
it worked a lot of times for us.
Sure.
Come out of the house, throw the gun down, that type of thing.
Most of the
But
situations.
let me rewind here. Do not resist. You'll never have a problem, ever.
Right, yeah.
Just put your hands up, wrap them around your back, walk away. You'll be out in the morning. Don't compound it.
Yeah, well, I think, like you said, there's a lot of frustration, which leads to anger on the streets. What were you going to say now?
I mean, I've had a situation where an individual's going to get stopped for driver's license suspended, and then pretty much from driver's license suspended, you pick up a fleeing eluding charge. Yeah. So now you're facing your first third-degree felony.
Right.
Then after that, you jump out of the car, you take off running. And you end up in a fist fight with a police officer as you're resisting with violence. And then you pick up a third charge because you pretty much tamper with the officer's mechanism to contact law enforcement. There you have a third felony. So something so simple as a second-degree misdemeanor, which pretty much any attorney can pretty much help you out of that situation.
Sure. Then
you're caught up with a plethora of charges where you're facing a boatload of time, and depending upon the agency, based upon the jurisdiction where you're in, you could be facing years in prison.
Yeah, now you were up there in Broward County in the state attorney's office.
Correct.
And as a prosecutor, what are some of the worst things that you had to deal with criminally?
Well, I mean, up there I handled anywhere from attempt murders all the way down. They have special departments for homicides. They have special departments for drug trafficking. Uh-huh. Within my 3 years there, I made all the way pretty much almost to a lead position or handling lead cases. I mean, you name it, I went across the board. I second chaired a death penalty case up there, and I second chaired the death phase of a death penalty case.
That's heavy, huh?
That was really heavy. That was really heavy. At that point in time, it was the right outcome. Mm-hmm. And it still is the right outcome as of today.
So how do you think the prosecutor's office functions in that county, as far as what I'm trying to ask is, I've heard from many guests on this program that a lot of these offices are overloaded, and there's a lot of young guns out of college that want to get the wins under their belt and then move on to private practice. And I'm just curious if you thought the same thing of that office up there. Is that the case?
The one thing that pretty much throughout my years there we learned is the office is a way of saying let the people of Broward County decide. So if it's a possibility that the individual is guilty, you let the people of the jurisdiction pretty much of Broward County decide the outcome of the case. As far as the prosecutor, you don't take it within your own grasp, and you don't bend the guidelines, like break the guidelines or break a guideline sentence. No, you let the people of Broward County decide. So guideline sentence is guideline. So what I was explaining to you before, that individual could be facing over a year and a day in prison. And pretty much the guidelines provide.
And a year and a day in prison means you lose your civil rights.
Correct.
Like, no right to vote when you get out, no right to, you have that civil death, I guess.
Correct. So pretty much in that jurisdiction, we would let the people of Broward County decide what would be the charges ultimately.
But when you say you're going to let the people decide, I don't understand that because, for starters, most people in the community are clueless when it comes to actual rules and regulations of the law, the criminal justice system. It's very confusing. It's confounding. It's overwhelming. And it seems to me that in the court of public opinion, just being arrested and taken in, most people think that guy did it.
And I would say you're possibly right in a good majority of cases.
Yeah.
But the thought process in Broward County, jurors are finders of fact. And the judges pretty much are the finder of law. So you let the finders of fact make the ultimate determination as far as whether the individual is guilty or not guilty of a certain offense.
But in Miami, I've heard people that have worked in the public defender's office and the state attorney's office talk about the trial tax. Are you familiar with this, the trial tax?
I'll practice federal court. We're absolutely.
Yeah, so that means if you decide to go to trial and you don't win, you're getting a little bit of a harsher sentence because you schlepped everybody through this process of going to trial instead of taking a plea deal or instead of settling out of and not having the whole process of the jury coming in and all that jazz. And I guess one of the questions that I'd like to know is, coming back to the whole polygraph thing, is does the polygraph help you guys avoid even having to go to trial? And if so, how does that work?
I would say in limited circumstances, I've used it.
Yeah.
But usually when I use it, it's for the commencement of the case. In my experience,
okay,
where I've actually used the results of a polygraph test in getting the government not to file charges.
Okay. Does that work?
Yeah, absolutely, it does work.
Yeah, it does.
It does.
That's done every day. Yeah, not every day, but every other day, and it's a good tool. It's an investigative aid. A lot of defense attorneys use polygraphs to move their client off square one. The evidence is overwhelming. You're sitting there. I know you're lying to me now.
Right.
Let's take a polygraph. Now the polygraph comes through, and it says that he's also lying as well. He or she is also lying as well.
Okay.
So now the attorney has some wiggle room. You failed the polygraph.
Right.
I don't have faith that we can present this to a jury. You tell me what you want to do.
Okay.
And then hopefully that'll push the person off square one to square two and get him to start helping himself, actually.
But as an attorney, would you say that I've heard many attorneys sit in this room and tell me that I don't ask the client if they're guilty or not guilty. I am here to represent them, to represent their constitutional rights, and their guilt or their innocence is not for me to decide. But it sounds like it kind of is sometimes.
When you're talking about negotiations and plea negotiations, it plays a factor in it. For instance, you were going to ask me about a potential example. I had a case where it was down in the Cutler Ridge area. A young man, young African-American male, was basically thought to have broken into a house, committed an armed robbery, and yada, yada, yada. There was a whole bunch of other stuff led up in the case. We eventually did a polygraph test within the first 40 days. The individual is being detained within those first 33 days. We asked for an extension of time in order to conduct a polygraph test. Polygraph came back, test that he was not being deceptive. Present that over to the state. State had to work their channels. Within 50 days, the individual walked out of custody, and pretty much no charges filed against the individual. That's the inception part of it.
To their credit, the state attorney's offices in both Broward and Dade County will never knowingly, or even the presence of somebody going to jail that's not guilty, they won't stand for it. They'd rather drop the charges.
I agree with that.
So they will
if they're
drop
not
charges
if they're
if they
not
see a polygraph?
if they're not totally convinced of their case. If the witnesses start to fall apart, if there's other issues involved in a case, they're not afraid to pull the plug on it.
So in other words, if there are other contributing factors to them not being sure, and then the polygraph comes through in favor of the person being innocent, they'll be like, you know what? In your guys' experiences,
I've had that done many times.
You have.
The standard to file a case, pretty much as a case filer at the state attorney's office, is a reasonable likelihood of conviction, and that's a very high burden that they have to overcome. So they have to have a reasonable belief that they're going to have a conviction at the end of the day.
Right. So you're also saying if you didn't do it, ask for a polygraph.
Oh, most assuredly.
Yeah.
The first thing I would do, if you wrongfully accused, you do everything in your power to prove that.
Sure.
Polygraph is one of them. I recently had an individual, he was in jail for 3 years, a crack house murder. Now, he stayed in jail 3 years, in my opinion, because he liked it. No responsibility, 3 hots in a cot, sex, drugs, whatever you want. It's prison.
Yeah.
So he liked it until trial started to approach. Now, the homicide scene was a crack house where a woman was shot in the head. Opened the window up to deal like, a convenience store or a fast food restaurant. They open the door up and they hand the drugs out. I'll take 2 bags of Skag. I'll take 2 bags of Coke. But this guy pulled up, shot her in the head because she had screwed him before.
Okay.
Apparently or allegedly. So my guy's behind a tree with 2 girls. He runs, holding a gun from the scene. His ex-girlfriend's in the street, knowing that he has that gun. She lived with him until she stole his drugs and money, and he kicked her out. So it's just the street, it's really the street. So the police show up, and naturally, she says, yeah, I saw him running with the gun.
Right.
Hello. 2 weeks later, he's in jail.
Sure.
But it's the people who are using drugs out there, please, this is what happens. And this is what happens just about every day here. It's not fun anymore. It's your life. So, I mean, this poor girl got shot in the head. They threw her in one of the roll-away garbage cans, wrapped her up in a bedspread and threw her in a garbage can, and went about cleaning the house up to open the window up and continue selling drugs. This is how cold and calculating it is, people. So this guy's in jail. He's got a .38, and the girl confirmed it was a .38 he was running with. She had seen it, held it while she lived with him. The murder weapon was a .45. Uh-oh. So when the forensics came back, so the state became a little concerned about the case now, and rightfully so. The same .45 was used in another crack house murder 2 weeks later while this guy was in jail already. So I polygraphed him. I understood why he didn't. He finally told me who did it. He told me the person's name.
Oh, yeah?
And because they all know each other at these drug places.
Okay.
They're like pals, Anyway.
Yeah, it's the streets.
Yeah, it's Streets 101, and it's really, really bad out there like that.
Yeah.
Stay away from it. And he told me the name, and the state attorney's not going to prosecute him for homicide now. That was what he was being charged with, second-degree murder. Mm-hmm. So
that's a heavy charge.
Oh, yeah.
And he wasn't fighting it?
No. You know why?
No, I don't know why.
He finally ran into a good attorney, a really good attorney. Probably like people present in the room now, really good attorneys, They're out there. They're really good guys. Sure. And this guy said, no, there's something wrong here. And let me, again, back up and say, this guy liked prison.
Right.
I mean, for people, normal people, it's very difficult to comprehend that, but they do. There's no responsibility, no problems. You eat every day. If you want to work detail, you can. You don't, you sit around, watch color TV, which they don't usually have. They have air conditioning. They got all the amenities. So they like prison, believe it or not. So this guy,
hard to believe.
So they didn't prosecute him on that murder charge.
Right.
And they're actively looking for the shooter now.
So they still haven't found the guy?
Not up to date.
And they had his name?
Oh, yeah. I gave him the name that he told me. But then again, who knows? We really can't take these people at face value. He passed the polygraph. He didn't shoot that woman.
Okay.
That was what I was there for.
Right.
But anything that is gleaned from that, I have to take with a, cocked head a little bit. Why are you waiting 3 years to tell me that?
Exactly.
Tell your attorney. So then you present that information back to the investigators and let them work with it. So
that's crazy. So
if I may just say, nothing's at face value out there. Nothing at all. If you think that it's Open and shut, it's really not.
You mean cases?
Cases, yes.
Yeah, because you've been on the front line of it, and
Yep.
you've worked behind the scenes also.
Eyewitness testimony is the worst.
I was just getting ready to ask you guys that, because I guess eyewitnesses have seen Santa Claus, they've seen the
yeah.
Virgin Mary, they've seen leprechauns,
I wish I
they've
could
seen
polygraph.
UFOs. Yeah.
I wish I could polygraph every single
Witness.
victim witness
Oh,
on every
yeah.
single case. Unfortunately, we don't get that luxury, but
Yeah, I mean, and we had a show on coerced confessions not too long ago, which is very interesting because this happens a lot. And I'm curious, have you guys ever had experiences with that, with coerced confessions, trying to deal with or sort out confessions that have come to light that maybe they were not gotten in the most kosher of ways?
I mean, I've seen it. I've seen it where individuals, the clients of mine, may be led down a certain path as far as how they're being questioned regarding a case and how they're being led down a path of, you did it.
Right.
And they eventually either they say something that they did the crime, or they say something that pretty much shows that they may be involved in the crime.
Yeah.
And it's through the process of the questioning of the law enforcement dialogue with the suspect,
Right.
as far as how that leads down to pretty much a statement. As far as beating them up and telling them 40 different things, no, I haven't come across that. But
I never witnessed that in all the time I was a detective. And there are some safeguards as well. If someone told me they committed a crime,
Yeah.
I want to know specifics of that crime that were not in the newspaper or that the public didn't know about. Mm-hmm. You tell me what kind of gun you used. You tell me, the weapon was never mentioned in media. But now tell me what kind of gun you had. Oh, I had a 9mm. Oh, that fits. Okay. Where did you shoot the person? Oh, in the head. Oh, that fits. So you start to piece the puzzle together that no one really knew this until he opened up and started to confess to it. Again, going back to Freud, and they have a compulsion to confess, and it fits. But you got to watch out for false confessions. If he didn't know the caliber of the gun or the position of the body where the bullet was shot, where the person was shot, and I would have reservations about it.
Yeah, but I'm wondering, because you seem like a detail guy in that, but it seems like sometimes just the straight up, yeah, I did it, and then the police could take that and go to the prosecutor's office. Now, where does somebody with the desire to know those specific details, such as yourself in this conversation, where do they enter the picture? Is that the defense attorney? Is that the prosecutor's office? Who is that?
That's the detective unit doing that.
Is it?
They don't want false confessions. Because the real killer may still be out there. They don't want it. They don't want that. People come into the station every time a newspaper story comes out. They come in to confess.
Oh, you mean
Walk in. Yeah, I did it. Here I am. Hey, it's Larry again. He did this one too. You know?
Really?
Oh, yeah. Oh.
people that just, I'm going to go confess to that crime?
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Really?
Well, they want the notoriety and they want the attention.
So that actually happens in real life?
That's why I told you earlier. Nothing at face value, ever.
That's
Never
a trip.
take any. If you're a detective or a cop,
Yeah.
you never take anything at face value. It's investigated, turned upside down, shaken out.
You want proof?
Oh, definitely. I'm not going to be dragging people who didn't do a crime into court.
Right.
Because, like I just said, it's the real shooters out there. Could potentially shoot someone else if you give up looking.
But I think that's one aspect of it. And you're talking about the homicide cases, but when you're talking about the guy that has the baggie of cocaine inside the car, when you're talking about the guy that has a gun inside the car and he's a prior convicted felon, I think the fact is that none of these statements are being recorded, and that's what you see a lot of times on the streets, because they don't have the device on their body cameras on or something like that. You hear the incident where the individual just blankly says, that's the only statement he gives is, yeah, that's my gun, or yeah, those are my drugs. I have reason to question that, because why aren't the body cameras on? Why don't they have these units on? Those are issues that come to light. The homicide cases and some of the upper echelon drug cases, they have well-experienced officers working them.
Right.
But some of the other cases, you question them. You question as far as why the individual just blankly made a statement.
Right. I mean, because I've heard people on this program tell us, yeah, we've seen coerced confessions, or we've seen officers not be 100% honest on the stand, or we've seen prosecution. I mean, I'm looking at you, Joe, and you don't seem like one of the guys that would have gone in. But have you ever seen any of your fellow officers have to bend the truth a little bit, maybe just to clean up a dirty corner?
Not in my presence. I wouldn't stand for that.
No?
None of us would.
No.
I basically, I'll be totally honest with you, I never cared that much to frame somebody or to hurt somebody. Who cares?
Right.
2 minutes later, you got another case. Let them go. Who's next? I mean, that's how it was.
Because there are real criminals.
Oh, and how do you go home and sleep at night if you're making false statements about people? I could never do that, ever. And I wouldn't let anybody in my...
Have you ever seen it happen?
No, not in my presence.
No?
Ever. I wouldn't stand for it. I just never would. And the majority of the police officers I worked with would never stand for it either.
I believe that.
Never.
I believe that. But I believe some sneak through also, because I've just heard too many stories, for it not to happen.
Well, these are officers who aren't that good. They can't get somebody straight, so they perhaps bend the truth a little bit.
Right.
But I never witnessed that.
Okay.
But I've seen it in the papers, and I read about it.
Right, because one of the things you said that was interesting in the beginning of this particular episode of Felony Miami was that sometimes the worst people on the polygraph are the
police applicants.
Police applicants.
True. I scratch my head. I'm like, holy crow,
That's crazy.
I don't know. They think they can get away with it. They think they can. They're masterminds of some
But what
sort.
kind of questions are you asking then that they're wanting to not be honest about? Drug use?
Oh, of course.
What?
Yeah. Crimes, undetected serious crimes, drug use, all sorts of other issues like selling drugs and
really
just basic questions like that, and some of them try countermeasures, and then you'll ask them at the end of the test, well, my friend's a cop and he told me to do that. I'm like, really? They're just never take anything at face value.
So now if they don't pass a polygraph,
they're gone.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, especially if they're using countermeasures.
Okay.
And why an honest person wouldn't do that? They just
when you say using the countermeasures, that's like the holding your breath or taking the beta blockers or some kind of nonsense like that.
And the Kegel muscle and all that. That's But now they have.
Well, you can tell when they're clenching their butt cheeks and they're giggling.
Yep.
Really?
Of course.
The telephone cord tells you.
I get a memo. No. No, what I have a pad they sit on now with these high-tech computers that are doing polygraphs.
Oh, really?
There's a pad you sit on, sensitivity pad.
And you can tell if you're...
So if you're squirming, moving, you can see it in the baseline on the bottom of the page. You can see that there's some additional movements that shouldn't be there.
Right.
I'll be quite frank. I took a polygraph exam when I went to the state attorney's office up in Broward. You have to take a polygraph test over there. And it wasn't all those nerves, all those sweating stuff that comes into play. I mean, you're there and you're being asked. I believe they're asked about 8 questions, and you're there being questioned.
What kind of questions?
Pretty much drug use, crimes, education. As far as did I cheat? Did you try to mess around with your bar exam? Things of that sort.
Job termination.
Yeah.
Missing spaces in your work application. That kind of thing.
I think in total we were asked a series of 10 questions.
Yeah,
the first part was just, hey, how's it going? And just normal questions. And then you get into the 10 drive them home questions. And you're getting driven home at that point in time.
Right.
So to speak.
Oh, man. But one of the things that I know from hearing people talk about these confessions is that, and you were a detective, so tell me whether or not you're aware of this. Cops are allowed to lie during the interrogation.
Of course. Yeah. That's the Supreme Court said that would be okay.
That
went that far.
Yeah.
It went that far. So.
And that's in order for you to try to find the truth?
Let me give you an example. You got a carload of people. One guy's the shooter, the other are passengers. Okay. So you split all 4 of them up. And you walk into a room and say, listen, Larry just rolled over on you, man. He said, you're the shooter. Baloney, he's the one. That's what you get from that.
Okay.
So you're stretching the truth a little bit.
Right.
But then it's for the betterment of society that these people confess because they're not out there shooting you tomorrow night.
No question.
It's whatever you could do to take these guns and these people off the street, you really should do.
Yeah, well, listen, we always reiterate on this program, there is crime out there.
Ooh, yeah.
And, we always do try to point out the flaws in the criminal justice system because there are flaws. And I'm going to ask you guys what you think the biggest flaws are in the criminal justice system that you have seen in your careers.
I'll let you go.
I'll let you go, but now I got to think about that one for a minute.
We start the Jeopardy music.
Flaws.
There are flaws, yes?
Yeah, of course. It's probably the courts and the leniency there. A lot of times they just let people out on bond that shouldn't be out on bond.
Yeah.
Let them go out on their own recognizance, that kind of thing. And then 2 days later you bring them back in again.
Mm-hmm.
Those are flaws, in my opinion. You should be able to hold somebody for the betterment of society, so you're not walking down the street getting mugged tomorrow.
But when you get a case like this young man that you were talking about, when Naeem was talking about, that was held for 50 days. Mm-hmm. So it's 50 days of his life gone. That's a rent cycle.
Lost his job.
Yeah, so the job's gone. The apartment, if he's got one, is probably getting ready to be foreclosed on, and the guy was innocent.
He shouldn't have put himself in that position to begin with.
Well, wait, he was walking home.
Yeah, he was walking home.
Oh, that he was? He wasn't in the car or something like that?
No, he was walking from one location to the other. It was a rainy day, and he was literally walking in the rain. He had the same, similar shorts and similar shirt, and he was an African-American male in that community.
Right.
And based upon that, he was targeted. And this is an individual that should have never been placed in custody in the day one.
Yeah, I mean, so what does he get in return for that? Nothing, right? Oh, sorry, we had the wrong guy.
Absolutely.
Good luck getting your orders back, your affairs back in order.
It's nice to know that he was let go, though. I mean, cooler heads prevailed.
Well, it is nice to know, but it seems like a bit of a flaw that somebody that was completely innocent got held for 50 days. And why did he get held for 50 days? I'm guessing that there was a bond and he couldn't make the bond.
What kind of history did he have, though?
None.
No priors?
Young man from FIU. Was going to college.
Yeah.
And we attempted to conduct a bond hearing, an ART hearing, and
what about a lineup? Did they give him a lineup?
Lineup pretty much matched.
To the victim? The victim ID'd
the victim
him?
ID'd him.
Yeah, well, there you go.
There's an eyewitness, but the eyewitness was wrong.
The eyewitness was wrong.
Rewind. Eyewitness testimony is the worst.
So then why
what's
do
the
they
police
use it?
what are the police to do?
If we know this, and I can't tell you how many people have told me and how many articles I've read that eyewitness testimony is useless, why is it something that they still do?
I don't know. I'm not in the...
That seems
I'm
like a
not
flaw in the
judge.
system.
You're right. It could be, but not every eyewitness testimony is flawed. But some of it is, of course. But if this person was ID'd by a witness in a 6-picture lineup,
right.
What are the police to do? He's worthless. Let's let him go. I mean, they can't do that. They have to go with what the witness says. Now they've got the time to investigate the entire case.
Right. But why is that witness who, I'm asking you guys because you're professionals in this business, but based on that primitive brain function, like you were saying back in the beginning of this show, that when you are confronted with fear, and I suppose if somebody's the victim of a crime, all of these things come into a play, and I imagine that your mind and memory are not clearly going to be serving you.
Right, especially if you're a victim.
Right.
If you're a victim of a crime.
So that eyewitness is probably completely useless.
But there was a safeguard there.
What's that?
The 6-picture lineup. The police present the witness maybe the next day when they compile all the pictures, give her some time to relax, him or her.
Yeah.
Detectives go to her house, go to her place of business, put a lineup of 6 pictures in front of her.
Yeah.
All similar. They're all like similar pictures. Same age, same race, same everything. And you pick that person out, what are the police going to do at that point? What can they do? They said, nah, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Let's let them go. No, that's not going to happen.
But you have 6-pack lineups. That's one, and then you have on-scene identification where they pretty much drive the individual over to where the suspect is, and he's just standing. He doesn't know what car is driving by or what it may be, and they say, "Do you know that guy?" Yeah, it's the one that pretty much drove by.
That's a flaw.
Pretty much,
that's a flaw right there.
and that's
I never
a big
did
problem in
that.
cases.
What's that now?
I never brought somebody back to the scene of a crime.
Oh, that's a technique.
No. You can do that, but I like to separate. The victim from the situation for at least 24 hours,
Right.
48 hours. Come back down to homeostasis where you belong. Then you go out with a picture lineup. You don't take a guy and shove him at her. Did this guy do it? Yeah, he's the one.
Well, not
Yeah,
only
I mean,
that, a
that's
person
the-
might be terrified and go, I'm not going to say anything. No,
Right.
no, that guy wasn't the guy because they're afraid of any kind of redress.
Well, normally those individuals are pretty much in the back of a car, and they're pretty
Right.
much driving by, black
Right.
tints all over, and then the guy just standing next to a police officer.
Okay.
You
That's how
recognize
you
the
guys
guy
do
standing
it?
next to a police officer, and then
Right.
it's
That's
come on.
That's kind of overwhelming for a victim. I had a case once, completely
Yeah, that's
opposite.
crazy.
It was an armed robbery of a liquor store. I chased the car, pulled them over on the Palmetto Expressway, exited them from the vehicle. Now, on the front seat was the mask, the bag of money with the name of the liquor store on it, and they took the liquor store owner to come to the scene. The robbery guys did. They brought him to the scene, and he couldn't identify him and drove away. But that's another part of it. I mean, that's
Yeah.
witness IDs. Maybe because they had masks on,
Well, yeah.
but he called the car in. The car was sitting right there, or maybe he was panicked. They'd come back and get him. I don't know. There could
Maybe,
be a number
yeah.
of factors, but the fact that they had the masks, the money, and the bag that the man put the money in
Right.
from his store. I mean, they did it. I mean,
Yeah.
but again, a witness ID was flawed from the other angle.
You know, when the opportunity to think about the question that you presented to me, I think one of the biggest flaws that I see in the system is being parallel to across the system. For some reason, certain courtrooms, certain prosecutors, whatever the situation may be, individuals aren't treated equally.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest flaws.
I guess-
Because an individual has the same crime, no priors, they shouldn't be treated differently if they're in courtroom A to courtroom B.
Right.
If they're in jurisdiction A or if they're in jurisdiction B.
How
They
can
should
we
be treated
fix? How
equally.
can we fix that? Because it seems that there's a human aspect to this whole system.
Oh, very much so.
And
It's
I-
all human aspect.
It's all
Right.
human. And I think
Yeah,
that
and humans make mistakes.
Yeah.
unfortunately
That's why they put erasers on pencils. I mean, we do
Yeah.
make mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Clearly, you could have a shitty morning and
yeah.
show up and they say, you know what, you're all guilty.
And it goes from judge to judge as well.
Well, yeah.
prosecutor.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Right,
it's all-
and we've had that conversation. That why is it that two murderers in two different courtrooms can get two different sentences?
I mean, I've literally
But-
sat on cases, and advised the client, well, you know, we're gonna sit it out through this period.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, you have to take depositions, you have to take sworn statements, you try to investigate the case.
Right.
But do we speed it up? Do we go quicker on the case? Is there a possibility that some factors may change throughout the period of the case?
Right.
If there's factors that can change throughout the period of the case, then do I take depositions in case A or do I take depositions in case B? And you sort of pick and choose which one you take depositions and how do you strategize your cases
Right.
based upon what situation your clients get caught up in court with
Right.
the certain prosecutor, the certain time frame, whatever it may be.
So this leads me to ask the question: what about drug cases and mandatory minimums? You're saying, because we do say, look, you can have two different killers with two different judges and two different sentences, but then there's a lot of people that may have $10 worth of cocaine and they're going away for a long time.
How long do we have today to sit here and talk?
Yeah,
But no, I'm just saying,
right.
is that another flaw in the system?
I think mandatory minimums are a huge flaw in the system because an individual can get caught up with an ounce of cocaine, which is 28 grams,
Yes.
over 28 grams, they're facing 3 years. And then another guy is caught up with 4 ounces of cocaine and they're still facing 3 years in prison. And basically you're forced with a mandatory minimum.
Yeah.
And so that individual can go away, both individuals with two different price values of what the merchandise that they have, they're both going away equally for 3 years.
Right.
And there's certain mechanisms that you can use, but it's all within the control of the state attorney's office.
So how do we change these mandatory minimums?
Legislature. On the legislature
So
side,
who you
unfortunately.
vote for?
Who you vote for. They pretty much are the ones that'll have the power to change what mandatory minimums were created for. Because they were created way back in the 80s when the Ronald Reagan administration. That's when we had all this discussion.
The war on drugs.
The war on drugs.
Yeah.
Was the emergence of mandatory minimums.
Yeah.
And how they broke it apart, both on the state level and
Yeah.
on the federal level, were created at that point in time.
But now these mandatory minimums, are these done state by state, or are they just federal, and do they apply in state court or federal court? How does that work?
Each state has their own independent minimum mandatory, which are applied by their government in that state. The federal has their guidelines as far as 5-year minimum mandatories, 10-year minimum mandatories, or whatever the numbers may be equate to be.
Yeah.
Right now we have an opioid epidemic, but we don't have, interestingly enough, on the federal level, there's no minimum mandatories
Well,
for some of
here's
these
the thing.
opioid
We have an opioid media epidemic is what we have, because still more people die from alcohol than they do from opiates. Opiates are just a big front page thing. Don't get me wrong. I think there is a big problem. And clearly, when white kids are dying from something, it seems that there's a lot more focus on it. But alcohol is still the number one killer.
Absolutely.
So that seems to be pushed under the rug. And I also believe that the whole opioid thing it's not a criminal issue. It's a public health crisis. And I think we can point the finger at a lot of places, but mostly at the drug companies.
And the doctors prescribing these
absolutely.
things.
Thank you.
That's where it begins. So that,
It's
still the inventory is there if you want it, inventory of drugs or whatever they are, but the doctors have to pull from that inventory, and they're the ones that are responsible. Enough of them go to jail too for it.
Yeah.
I do a lot of those cases, Medicare frauds and things like that.
Tell me about that.
Well, you've got these 80 and 90-year-old doctors writing prescriptions to blank paper. And then whoever comes along, an aide or something else, fills it out with a legitimate doctor's signature on it. And his ID number, his DEA number's there.
Yeah.
So that's a real crisis right there. To distribute these drugs, and you have a rubber stamp at the end of it, giving these drugs out to people.
Yeah.
So that's what you want to stop. You want to stop that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems is that a lot of people get caught up in the prescription aspect of it, maybe even with a legitimate injury, and then trying to get those prescription drugs becomes cost prohibitive, or even
Doctor says no.
Doctor says no, and then they need
Right.
that fix, and then they hit the streets because
They look for
and
it,
then
yeah.
they end up
$15, $20 a bill.
Yeah.
No, it's
Is it more?
it is it's a crisis. Don't get me wrong, but again, I like to always point out that alcohol is still killing more people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's
Because it's more readily available.
right. Yeah,
You can walk down the street and get a bottle of liquor.
right.
But it's kind of tough if you're looking to score opioids, heroin, things like that. It's a little more difficult.
Yeah, it's more difficult, and a lot of people have been dying because for some reason this fentanyl is making its way into our communities and killing people.
Well, you have fentanyl, you have Oxycontin. That's pretty much well distributed. I've handled cases of Oxycontin pretty much in Kentucky. HIV medication up in New York. Oxycontin out in Minnesota.
Yeah,
I've handled federal cases across the whole country
you have.
of heavy trafficking or conspiracy to traffic Oxycontin, which is one of the leading ones that doctors prescribe nowadays.
Yeah,
Because they work.
It's deadly. But the thing is, there are people that need those medications too.
Absolutely.
And then there's people that clearly abuse them.
Yep.
And so listen, I hope we can figure it out. There are some proven techniques on ways to deal with addiction and this whole public health crisis, but a lot of them are underfunded. And I'm curious, how many of these crimes that you guys represent and deal with, I know Joe said that a lot of them come from people being frustrated and angry, but I'm curious how many of them come from people being high.
Well, that's a big part of it, too.
I mean,
a very big part of it. Yeah.
I think that's one. I think the violent crimes and sort of like the theft crimes emerge out of there. A lot of what I deal with on some aspects is greed. When you're dealing with the white collar crimes,
Greed.
it's greed. It's you get into a phrase that pretty much you live a certain lifestyle, and now you got to maintain that lifestyle, and now you want more, and you want more, and how do you keep up that lifestyle? And then pretty much you're maintaining yourself. And you get into a vicious cycle where greed kicks in.
Yeah.
And that's where you see a lot of the white-collar crimes, unfortunately, phase out.
Greed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been a very interesting show. One of the things that we like to ask our guests before we wrap up the show is, because a lot of us that produce this show have a music background. So we like to just know what you guys are listening to musically in these last week. Who's on your playlist, or who you listening to on the radio in your car?
I mean, I'm a country guy.
All right,
so
nice.
I listen to either the new country, which is like the Luke Bryants or like that stuff, but I can go way back and listen to the Kenny Rogers and the Willie Nelsons, and that's pretty much what you hear if I get out of here, it'll be on the country station listening to some country music on the way back home.
There you go. That's
Kind of stuck on rock and roll. Stevie Nicks.
all right.
She's still a little hottie.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
That kind of thing.
I heard Fleetwood Mac's putting a comeback tour with
All right.
everybody.
I'm there.
Yeah. I heard everyone's going to be in there. All right.
I can always listen to old rock. I went to the Guns
it's
N'
great,
Roses
right?
concert
Yeah.
not too
Oh,
long
yeah.
ago, and that was great.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Of course.
Good old rock and rollers.
Yeah.
No
Well,
replacing it. No.
No doubt. Well, we definitely appreciate you guys taking some time out and coming down here and telling us about how people lie and how we can catch them doing it. For the Felony Miami team, I'm your host, Joe Stone. Don't forget to check us out online, felonymiami.com. Give us a like. You can see us on Spotify, Apple iTunes, or your favorite RSS feed. We'll see you next time.
Well, it's early on in the morning, then when I ride